Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started now. Just want to mention one more time, the Q&A function for your questions and answers. We actively solicit questions and comments on these webinars, so we'd very much like you to provide your input and ask anything you want related to MDR, MSOC, and we'll do our best to answer. If you'd like a copy of the slides, please also put that in the Q&A function and we'll get them off to you after the webinar is concluded. Thank you very much. And I want to introduce our panelists today. We have Steve Racing from ASMGi and Tim Smoot from Arctic Wolf. You are very fortunate today, and you have two of the leading cybersecurity experts with respect to managed detect and respond and managed security operations in the country. And they're going to go through a number of things today. It's going to be a very informative session, so hopefully you can join us and stay with us for the entire session. So I'm going to turn this over to Steve Racing right now, and like I said, feel free to jump in with questions at any time. We'll get to them real time or towards the end of the session. Thank you very much. Steve?
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to all the attendees for sharing your time with us today, and special thanks to Tim Smoot. Really appreciate you being with us today, Tim. And we've done this a few times now, so no pressure, but I really appreciate the way that your brain works and your thoughts. And I know we'll have some really good dialogue today. So thanks again for being here today.
My pleasure.
And I just want to remind everybody, it's, you know, our goal is to really just have a discussion about this. If you have a question, you can ask it real time. At any time during the presentation, please. You're free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and jump in. And I will warn you, if you raise your hand, it's possible that we won't notice it right away. So, but we'll try to incorporate any questions from the audience real time if we can. If not, we have some Q&A time at the end of the session designated to that. So what are we going to talk about today, Tim? Well, if I can get this thing to move, I'll go through the agenda a little bit. So just a little bit of background information. We'll try to get through this pretty quickly, but I just want to talk about why it's so critically important to have a robust security operations center and what that really means to an enterprise, and then what does the landscape look like in today's cyber world. How is it that MDR and MSOC, have MSOC meaning a managed security operations center? How is that a foundation of my security arsenal, right? So we're going to go through some of that, and then our branded solution, which we leverage Arctic Wolf heavily for, kind of powered by Arctic Wolf, our One Team MDR and SOC Plus program. I want to talk specifically about the components of that and how it's put together, and really, who it's best suited for, and how it can help, and those kind of things. So, and then we'll go through some key takeaways from the day. So, fair enough. You ready to get rolling?
Let's go.
So let's start with why are cyber security operations so critical? And this is really the first pop quiz for you, Tim. Surprise, right? So, but some pretty well-known public breaches and various different things, and they all have some characteristics behind them, just based on due diligence and forensics and investigative services that have been accomplished. So we know a lot more looking back at them than we did at the time, but they all have a few things in common. So what do you think is the things that these breaches have in common?
Yeah, probably the first one is there's I think if you would interview any one of these larger breaches and the situations that led up to them, I think every one of these organizations would have said that right off the cuff that they believed that they were protected. They believed that they were good to go from a security perspective, and they didn't really have anything to worry about outside of just the real wackadoodle situation that may come up. It is excuse me, it is interesting that we as an organization, from a security side of the coin, there's a fair amount of whitewashing that happens with respect to some of these larger organizations that you hear about in the news. And what ends up happening with that whitewashing is some other organizations that feel like they may be on the target list, or maybe they need to address their security a little bit more intimately than they currently are, kind of keep pushing it down the road a little bit from a project standpoint, thinking that they're pretty much covered. The other side of it that I think is very relevant to bring up is the threat vector methodologies of each one of these type organizations. It's no happenstance that we picked these four, obviously, because we wanted to give some representation here from the standpoint of, on the Jack Daniels side of the coin, that was probably in most people's minds, that would be one of those security by obscurity type situations, right? I would bet that most folks would think that Jack Daniels probably wasn't on the top of the list of places that would be hacked, right? On the Equifax side of the coin, their entire business is personal information, right? PII is literally their lifeblood, and their breach was literally a simple vulnerability that everybody knew about, and any simple tool you could download would have detected it. It just simply wasn't implemented.
Right.
When we think about Capital One, this brings to bear one of the things that a lot of organizations are facing every minute of every day today, which is, this massive migration to the cloud from an infrastructure, a security, or a software as a service type methodology, and maybe aren't quite as comfortable with some of the security dynamics that are associated with those type of migrations. And then the last one, I think, is probably the one that gets brushed over the most. And it's the fact that, people have this impression that if they've got a good firewall, they've got a good antivirus, and their Windows boxes are up to date, that they're neither a target nor penetrable. Our friends here at Honda, which is literally about 8 miles over my shoulder here, those folks were hacked, and the hackers targeted their control systems, not their Windows boxes, not their personal information. They literally just hacked in to shut down their operations. So there's not, I guess what I'm trying to say here is we're playing a very long and very drawn out game of whack-a-mole. And each one of those moles that sticks his head up looks a little bit different than the previous one. It's not the same creature every time.
Right. Yep. When I thought about this, Tim, the things that really resonated with me, first of all, I think first and foremost, one of the common threads across all of these breaches is they're all avoidable, right? They could have all been prevented. And I get it, right? In retrospect, everything's clear in hindsight, right? But a known vulnerability, to your point, a commercial vulnerability scanner finds a vulnerability and it's known, and you just don't have the capacity. We see this in enterprises all over the place, large and small, sophisticated, not sophisticated, it doesn't matter. Who's got the capacity to do the things that they should be doing, the blocking and tackling, right? The foundational elements. And this is it's a huge area of concern. And a couple stats I didn't really include in this, but are worth mentioning. 99% of data breaches are from known attacks, right? And these are known attacks that are happening on known vulnerabilities. This stuff, it's sure there's 0-day stuff and there's new things and new tools and techniques and all that come out constantly. But the hackers, they just want to be able to get in your network and make money, right? So they're going to try the easiest way that they can. They've got a playbook for how to exploit an open RDP port. They're going to look for those first, and if there aren't any, then they'll try something else, right? But anyway, it's interesting, and there's a lot of things. One of the other things that jumped out at me that I think the MDR MSOC program speaks directly to is the time to detection, right? So, and in the Jack Daniels breach, the hackers were on there for a month or so, but the average, believe it or not, from the 2019, this is very recent data, IBM and Ponemon do this study every year, right? So 206 days, that's the average time that an attacker is on a network before being detected. That's just, it's mind blowing. It just blows my mind every time I think about it. So
Before you move on there,
I'm
Steve,
sorry, go ahead.
jump back real quick. Alex had a really quick question on what the initial attack vectors were on each one of these examples. On the Jack Daniels one, we don't have that information yet. They haven't really released exactly how it happened. But the other three were as we said on the Equifax one, that was a known vulnerability in I believe it was an Apache vulnerability that was not patched, that was exploited on the Capital One one. That wasn't really. It depends on how you determine and how you actually mark it up. It was more of a configuration issue, which is very common in the cloud space, where you don't necessarily make a mistake with respect to leaving an open port or something like that. Theirs was a deviation from a configuration standard, and that was targeted. And then on the Honda breach, it was an outside exploit of a control system. So we don't know if it was like a Johnson & Johnson control or something like that, but it was a known vulnerability in a network-based control system. So it could have been HVAC, anything like that. But those are all very dynamic, and they change. To Steve's point, they change literally by the minute. And I don't believe any of those were spear phishing. But like I said on the Jack Daniels example, I don't have that detail as of yet.
Yep. It's interesting, Tim, to me, just real quick, I'll sneak this in, but like the misconfiguration thing. So 2017 was the year of S3 buckets being misconfigured, right? And we heard about it hundreds of times, and it was usually really bad, right? But somebody would leave an S3 bucket wide open to the public, and somebody would just steal the data. I just read an article yesterday that Expedia.com. So these are big companies, right? Public companies. They have boards. They get asked very hard questions. They have a CISO. They have controls in place, right? They get audited on them and various different things. And then somebody misconfigures an S3 bucket, and it's a third party. It's a third party that they leverage. That grabs their data, pulls it into an S3 bucket, it's misconfigured, and it gets breached. It's still today, this is a problem. It's a huge problem, right? If you're not watching the store, that's the message in all of this. So just again, okay, so what problem are you trying to solve? I like this slide that you had, Tim, and I just want to, I want to say, let's not talk about it for a second, right? Let's just let it sink in. Right. Yeah. So everybody take a good look at this and think about it, what it's trying to say. Right. And then we'll come back to this information, Tim, in a second. But we call what we just experienced and looked at the fog of more. Right. It's a security term. It's been around for a while. But basically what it says is this: more everything, but not necessarily more security. And if you think about it, that other slide, we hear about security companies launching daily. There's just tons of them, right? So today it's 3,000, tomorrow it's 3,020, next week it's 3,050. Who knows where we're at today, right? I don't, honestly, but there's more than 3,000 security companies, more options, more tools, more knowledge, certainly more data, right? The fog of more basically says there's more of everything, but not necessarily more security. So here's where I think we just kind of put our arms around it and just wrap it all up and sum it up. And I love this, this part of it. But why don't you just explain what you're, what we're talking about and what this all really means in the context of buying security products or solutions to security problems?
Yeah, it's if we look at the news, we've already gone over the fact that there are multiple people getting hacked, and we all know, right now that this slide says 3,400 breaches from 2019. Everybody on this webinar is completely aware that number is exponentially higher than that. Those are just the ones that are actually reported. There's no shortage of security tools, right? There's no shortage of different types of security aspects. There's a limitless cloud of tools that you could implement. And we have spent a lot of money putting those tools in place. And I think one of the things that really needs to be brought up here is none of us is pointing at that slide with all those different security vendors and saying that they're bad. That is definitely not the case. What we have to refer to and think about is, kind of in a car repair analogy, right? If I go buy every tool that is available because I need to change the oil in my car, first of all, I don't know that I purchased the right tool, even though I bought all of them. And secondarily, I'm not sure how to use the right tool, even if I did buy it. And third, and probably most importantly, it's probably not the only tool I need in order to accomplish that oil change. So there's a lot of pieces and parts that go along with buying tools and putting them in place and expecting them to be part of your security posture. And I think it's, as the saying there on the slide says, I think everyone's very well aware of the fact that they need to put tools in place. And I think a lot of customers definitely have done that. They're also very well aware of the number of options. And that's where things start to do that fog of more, as you referenced. And then last and certainly not least, virtually every organization has some kind of a budget that's targeted for some kind of a security implementation. But at the end of the day, even though we have all of those pieces and parts in place, we still have people getting breached, and we still have issues with known vulnerabilities, and we still have trouble remediating these problems. And when we look at it from that context, we recognize that the missing component isn't really the tools or the implementation of them. It's more of the effectiveness and the capabilities of putting those tools together as one actual security posture. So the effectiveness is really the issue. It's not really the tools themselves. Oh, you're muted there, Steve. It had to happen. The classic webinar mistake.
So I apologize for that. I muted because it's inevitable that, I'm on a webinar and my kids decide to start screaming at the top of their lungs. So I'm doing this for everybody out there. Trust me. So sorry about that. But I think it's a great perspective, Tim. And, we could talk for a long time just about the concept of putting tools in place and those kind of things. And we'll get to some of that a little bit later. But there's people are spending a boatload of money on security, and breaches are still happening. I think that's a huge lesson in this. And the other thing, that I get that really resonates with me is hard. It's hard to be a buyer today. It isn't like there's one solution for one problem, right? There's 20 solutions for a problem at a minimum, right? And somehow you have to decide what's going to work for me. It's not easy. It's hard to be a buyer of security products, but there is a way to kind of help, right? And if you just can you just step us through some of the things from your perspective that we can do to address this effectiveness issue? Because to your point, it's not a matter of whether a control exists. It's a matter of whether it's effective, right? It's not a matter of whether you're doing something, right? Or you buy a piece of technology. So I always say it like this: you can't solve a security problem by buying a piece of technology. You can only solve a problem by doing something, right? Which a lot of times includes buying something. There's no question, right? But then you have to do it. You have to put it to work for you. But why don't you talk us through some of these ways that we can address this effectiveness issue?
Yeah, I myself, I come from a long time in the infrastructure space. I managed a credit union data center for 10 years. So really, when I started kind of embracing this whole security as a job type thought process, really what I very quickly understood was, back to our discussion about the tools, we don't really have a problem understanding that we need things. sometimes the problems are really how to address that ongoing implementation, or what may be next, or the right perspective in how to address them. And so I broke it down into these 5 different steps. And they truly are in order. I think probably doing in this methodology is much more successful than, taking them out of order, but you could probably mix a little bit of them around. But at the end of the day, most of the security, regardless of which tool you deploy, most of the benefits that we can see in a security posture come from information, right? We have to truly embrace that thought process that everything in my infrastructure is part of not only my threat surface, but also the prevention from me being attacked, right? So let's eliminate all of the possibilities of there being information that's valuable that's not being reviewed. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, and probably the easiest one to understand, but the hardest one to wrap your arms around, is 2 different pieces. And the first of which is that, the bad guys, as we were saying before, most of them aren't doing any work at all. They're downloading tools for free from the dark web. They're changing a few different things. They're probably even ingesting free IP address scopes and things of that nature, and running these free tools against them. And they're probably not monitoring when they're running the tools, right? They've went to bed, and mom and dad told them it was bedtime, and they have to turn off their Xbox, and that's the end of their day. All they got to do is wake up the next day and look at all of the successful penetrations they've had, and then start processing that. So don't think that the bad guys are punching the clock just like you and your people are. And then the other part of it is trying to mix and match. And this is very common in the world that we live in today, right? We've finally embraced the fact that we need an IT team, a network operations center, folks that are making sure the servers are up, the workstations are connecting, people are logging in, the assets that they need are available. Those aren't the same people that are going to be doing security. And the reason isn't that they're not capable. The reason is because it's a completely different thought process. Most of what we do in the NOC operations center, so the network operations center side, are very SOP oriented type functions, right? They're reset a user count, reboot a server, confirm that a patch has been applied, or maybe even setting statistics or capabilities on a network port. And those are the same functions over and over. In the security world, it's not like that. It can be completely different for the exact same vulnerability, because the threat surface may have changed. It may be the same methodology, but the threat surfaces are totally different. And the attack surfaces themselves can move around. So you have to understand that security is much more dynamic than network operations is. And then, the fact of buying the tool and implementing it, and now I'm done. That's not real life in the security world, right? Your security posture isn't somewhere you get to. It's something that you maintain. It's not a destination, it's a journey. And then the last, and certainly not least, is we have to, just like we did, back in the storage and the networking days, we have to start recognizing that security isn't really supposed to be a roadblock or a speed bump for our business. It's supposed to extend our business. It's supposed to enhance our business, enable our business. So we have to recognize that doing the right things with our security posture should actually benefit the business overall. And if, like I said, if we look at all these pieces and we put them together in that way, you'll notice that nowhere in there have we said anything specific about a type of tool, about a type of methodology, about a type of resource. We've literally just broken it down into ways to address effectiveness.
Yeah, right on. So you're on a roll, Tim. I'm going to try to keep you going here, because and I'll just frame this up. But so we go from some techniques that we can implement to make ourselves more effective and those kind of things, and then I just framing that up into a model right? And breaking the initiatives into pieces, I think is brilliant. And I like this proactive, reactive, active concept. So maybe you can explain what this is telling us.
Yeah, definitely. And again, staying really focused on that simplicity side of the coin and not getting into that fog of more that you talked about earlier is, once we've decided to go on that security journey, there are aspects of that security journey that have to be addressed. And this is where we start to delineate where the tools fit in as part of the actual security posture. And the first one is the proactive approach, right? That's the low hanging fruit. That's the easiest one on the plate. It sometimes is the one that is the easiest to mess up, though. And when we talk about proactive, we're talking about eliminating all of the known vulnerabilities, right? Making sure those Windows patches are applied, and we're up to date on our remote access controls. Our cloud infrastructure management is monitored and maintained. Our remote access tools are doing the limitations and the confirmations that they need to be doing in order to prevent our home users from infecting our local networks. Our access capabilities are implemented appropriately. So that proactive side is a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of pieces and parts to that. And with that typically comes a whole lot of different tools. That's why managed risk tools are very, very valuable, is because they really narrow down those multiple tool scenarios. They don't necessarily enforce the implementation of those patch remediation steps, but they're very good at letting you know repetitively that this needs to be addressed, right? The next one is the reactive side. As I said earlier, security is a journey. It's not a destination. And kind of a piece that gets attached to that whole journey process is the fact that security changes every day. There's nobody from a security tool standpoint, including myself, that should be telling a customer, you implement this and you'll never be hacked, because that's not realistic. If a human being built it, a human being can hack it. There's no such thing as the smartest person on the planet. And if there is, there's a new one tomorrow. So we have to be careful about getting, lackadaisical and overconfident in the fact that we have done everything that possibly can be done. And that makes us completely invulnerable, because that's not reality. And kind of dovetailing into that reactive side is the fact that we have to actively be watching and participating in that multi-visibility on that security journey, right? If we're trying to leave tools sit there and spin and spit out logs and do automatic functions for us, we're setting ourselves up for a big problem. One of the big things that gets pushed in the market today is artificial intelligence and machine learning. And those definitely have their places. I have no problem with people leveraging those kind of tools. However, an artificial intelligent element is not intelligent. It has to be taught. So if you just happen to be patient zero on a new hack, your AI-based tool is not going to be able to see it. That's not its capability. It's only looking for things that it knows are issues. So it's looking kind of like our old antivirus tools, right? They're looking for very specific signatures and then doing processes based on those. If it's a hack with a totally different signature, an AI tool is completely going to miss it. And that's not its fault. It was just deployed in the wrong way. So proactive, reactive, and active are really the true triangle of the complete security posture picture.
Yep. Yeah, I like that. I like that metaphor a lot. And then I think, what becomes critical in this conversation is how do you take that conceptually then and apply it to real world things? What are the components of a solution that would fit into each of those buckets?
Yeah, and this is a very limited scope of tools that I've brought up here, and obviously I've not brought any vendors into the equation here either. So this is not the limited view that you should take. You should definitely review multiple options out there. but just as a small, very rudimentary list. Your proactive elements I've already mentioned would be things like a risk tool or a managed risk tool. An intrusion prevention tool would also be a proactive tool, but there are many more that are in that category. On the reactive side, your managed detection and response, your endpoint detection and response, those kind of tools are detecting things that are out of the norm. We call those indicators of compromise. An intrusion detection tool would also be that. And those are the ones that are basically saying something doesn't look right. You need to check into this, right?
Yeah.
And then the active side of it is it really comes down to people. I want to make sure I highlight that first. The human aspect of it is the most important part of that active component. But that human active component is going to be leveraging things like a SIM, multi-factor authentication. Those kind of tools are actively providing security posture as part of your overall security triangle.
Yep. No, I think it's wonderful, and I think it really helps to be able to make that association when you're trying to figure out what the right things to do are. And one of the things that we talk a lot about is kind of moving from a point solution mentality. So just ties back to a lot of the things that we talked about, right? There's 3,000 plus solutions to buy, but what we see a lot of enterprises, they get caught in this trap of adopting a framework. And again, to your point earlier, it isn't about whether the framework is good or bad, right? I believe that frameworks are good, and you have to have controls, right, to pass audits and do all these other things. But it's real easy to get caught in the trap of doing one initiative and then saying you're done, right, and moving on to the next initiative, and then doing that one, and then moving on to the next. And we call that the point solution mentality, because you think about one solution, then you think about the next thing, and you think about another. So by nature, it's kind of fragmented, right? If you think about it that way, it's disconnected. It's not a continuum, and it's not a journey. It's a finish this initiative, then do this initiative, then. And most security departments, quite honestly, that we talk to, like in 2020, are still working on last year's initiatives, right? It's very difficult to ever like catch up. I think if you're trying to think about security that way, one initiative at a time, and by the time you do catch up, you have to start over again anyway, because there's a whole different. So the holistic mindset is a different way of thinking about it, right? It's more of a continuum, and it's more of a proactive approach. And it's worth mentioning that the holistic mindset really applies to all of those components that you talked about: proactive, reactive, and active, right? So we're leveraging proactive in a little bit different way. This is kind of how you think about a solution in general. But at the end of the day, it's about total solutions in our world. And a total solution doesn't exist if it doesn't have a program to something to define objectives or outcomes that you desire. In today's world in 2020, it's impossible to do things without the use of technology, and certainly in security, right? So there's no shortage of technology, and it's not just about the technology, but it has to include technology. There's way too much data for humans to analyze on their own, right? So you need a SIM to correlate data and do various different things, so that while you're watching it with humans, that you know what to look for, and and then you can tie events together and those types of things. But in any event, program plus technology plus operations. The operations piece in this, Tim, I get really excited about, because, well, for a couple of reasons. One is because we're really good at it, right? But two is because a lot of people, when you think about operations, that's about doing things. I'll go back to, my kids. I'm trying to get them to pick up their toys, right? Which in the COVID thing, we're all trapped at home. It's pretty challenging. So I had this discussion with my son, and I'm like, the only way that's going to get done is if you actually do it, right? You can't think about doing it. You can't, try to get somebody else to do it. I suppose you could, right? But you spend a lot of time, the amount of time that you spend trying to figure out all those other things, planning for it or thinking about it or whatever. If you just do it, right? And it's the same way with cyber and operations. A lot of times, like the remediation of vulnerabilities, you have to do it. And operations is about, tomorrow somebody has to do this stuff. And the day after tomorrow, somebody has to do it. And a week from tomorrow, somebody has to do it. 2 weeks from tomorrow, somebody has to do it. It has to get done every single day and ongoing. And there's a part that this operational piece that has to be considered when you think about creating a total solution. You can't just buy a piece of technology. That's at the end of the day what it really boils down to. So, so that's that. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I was going to add one piece to it that I think is really relevant with respect to ASMGi is that when you look at that operational aspect in security, and we kind of link that back to the multiple thousands of tools that are out there, and the fact that those are effective tools, bringing those tools in, implementing them, and then adjusting and integrating them in such a way that they match your business and your capabilities is where folks like you guys come in to adjust their security posture and their cybersecurity initiative to match up with what they're doing as a business and what their requirements for that business are. One of the things that I don't say enough of that is very relevant is, simplifying what you do doesn't necessarily make it the accuracy go up. And, I think in a lot of the things that we're trying to deploy in today's world with security tools is we're trying to make that portion of the business easier. And it may actually help a little bit, but at the end of the day, it's not really simplifying anything if it's not making it more effective. So the people that are good at tying that operational aspect to the business as well as the tool really make that come true, and that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I agree. And when you think about the capacity to get something done, it's not just headcount, right? It's expertise. I hear a lot of enterprises, their feedback is, we really need this or something like this, but we don't have time to learn a new technology right now, right? We're kind of tapped out. Our brains are tapped out. This is a huge part. So having the resources to actually accomplish an outcome is not just headcount, it's also expertise, right? And some people, I think you made this point about the SOC-NOC comparison, right? It's not a matter of whether you can do something, it's a matter of whether you should, right? Because if you do one thing, there's something else that you're not doing. So I think that's a critical piece. So what really all I wanted to try to do with this was kind of break it down and get into the weeds a little bit into what's included in each one of these pillars. And I think you made this point on improving effectiveness. The order matters, right? And a lot of times all of these things are living and breathing, and so they have to continue to evolve, and it's a continuum. But I really think that people should do the program first, right? And because this is where, like, you define what's important to your organization, and you made this point, Tim, and it's just so meaningful, right? You can be exactly like another business, and just things mean something different to you than they do to that other business, right? We all have our own security cultures, we all have our own mindsets, and we all have our own way of doing things, right? So just being able to tailor a program to your specific way of doing business and articulate it within the confines of that program, I think it's critically important. But define what your objectives are, right? So what problem are you trying to solve? What are your SLAs and SLOs? Just put it all in the program. Who you're going to call, I mean, that's important too, right? But that's just define all that stuff in the program, and then pick the piece of technology that best helps you leverage that, leverage automation, make it easier, make you more effective, those kind of things. But if you take the time to do that program first, picking the technology, now at least you can align it with something, right? And it has to do these things. And then thirdly is that operational piece, right? And both operations and technology have to tie back to the program. There's no question. So building an operating model is not trivial. So you don't just buy a piece of technology and plug it into your network and hope for the best. And a lot of the technology is cloud-based or whatever anyway, right? You have to do third-party risk on all the vendors. You have to, if it's a filter, you have to come up with the rules. You have to figure out what's important to you. You have to figure out, is it different for Department A and Department B, or location A and location B? And you have to go through all these processes. And your operating model has to include those things, right? So when we talk about MDR, MSOC, an operating model, it has to include, the managed detect and respond piece. It has to include the managed SOC piece. It has to include the incident response piece. It has to include the vulnerability management piece and remediation and all those things. If they're not in there, then you're not improving your effectiveness, right? So anyway, that I thought it was helpful. It would be helpful to the audience to really break it down this way. So I wanted to do that. Do you have any comments on that as I toggle through to it?
No, and I think the beauty of all of that is that, walking that very gradual, very logical path down to the appropriate end result, it takes focus, and it takes time, and it takes dedication. But at the end, you're going to end up with something that actually contributes to a positive security posture, as opposed to, still having chinks in the armor and then trying to address it in multiple other different ways.
Yeah. So this I just want to state the obvious, but our MDR MSOC Plus program, and we've had this conversation multiple times, Tim, to really try to, kind of hash it out and make sure that we were improving people's effectiveness. But it's Arctic Wolf plus ASMGi. There's no question, and that's the basis of it, and that's what really gets me excited. So I don't need to spend a lot of time on that, but I want to make that point. And then I just want to kind of dig in a little bit on what is the program, that we're putting together. And I want to talk about the Arctic Wolf stuff in a pretty good level of detail, and also the ASMGi pieces, right, that we're doing on that. But so when I think about the program holistically, we could spend so much time on this topic, and there are so many different things we could go into, but just breaking out the functions, or if you will, of a true MDR MSOC program, I broke it out like this. There's a security operations center, so there has to be, that's a people and a technology thing, right? There has to be MDR. There has to be the managed risk services, like you talked about, the reactive component and the proactive component, and the managed cloud monitoring, like we saw in that, in that breach data. We want to help people be more effective at setting up their cloud environments, right? So we have to monitor those for configuration errors and be able to repeat back to somebody, is like, hey, your S3 bucket is open, wide open to the public. Maybe you ought to think about putting a password on it. That kind of thing, right? I think that's a critical element for sure. Cyber incident response and forensics. So this is one of those areas where it gets a little bit, gray, and it can be challenging sometimes, quite honestly, to really articulate, like, where your team stops and where we pick up with the incident response stuff. And so I want to drill into that a little bit, Tim, and just kind of get into the weeds about, these kind of things. But it's an important part of, and you made the point earlier, you can put all the right controls in place and all the right tools, and you can have somebody watching 24/7 and all those things. MDR, managed detect and response, somebody has already compromised your network. If they're tripping an indicator of compromise, it's called that for a reason, right? They've compromised your network. What I really get excited about is, this service gives us an opportunity to do something about it before bad stuff happens, right? So it's post-compromise but pre-breach. Hope that's the desired outcome, post-compromise, pre-breach, from the MDR standpoint. But you're going to get compromised. It happens to everybody. 51% of the companies on this call will experience a ransomware event in 2021. That's the statistic, right? 51%. That's 1 in 2 companies, right? It's just phenomenal when you think about it that way. And I think the security community at large is thinking more about, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, right? But anyway, net is have the program in place so that if somebody does, however, compromise your network, however they're able to do that, that you have the tools and techniques in place to do something about it, right? Vulnerability management and remediation. Again, this is an area I could do an entire discussion just about that topic, quite honestly. But these are the things that everybody knows they should be doing. Most vulnerabilities are publicly available. Vulnerability scanners. The bad guys are using the same vulnerability scanners that the good guys are going, right? So if you have a vulnerability, they're going to find it. And it's going to show up on a list after they wake up and eat breakfast. They're going to look at their list and they're going to go, oh, so-and-so's got an open RDP port or some known vulnerability, and I have a playbook for that. I'm going to compromise or exploit that vulnerability and steal their data, period. That's the way it happens. But anyway, this is the program. And I just wanted to go through this and give you a chance. What we tried to do with this is just really, kind of break it down to, these are the pieces that we do together with Arctic Wolf, and these are the pieces that Arctic Wolf doesn't really want to do, right? It's kind of out of scope for you, but we want to pick those up and make them part of the package. And I think that's from an effectiveness standpoint, I think it's very special, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is I heard a customer say it about 3 or 4 months ago, and I think it's completely relevant. When you're talking about managed detection and response, he said the whole idea behind MDR is to make an issue a non-issue, and really, if you extrapolate that from a thought process standpoint, someone may still be a victim of malware or ransomware. But if it's detected immediately and it's isolated or contained in MDR speak, then it's contained to that one box. And even though a person may be inconvenienced, you don't have to worry about it from a business side of the coin. That person may be inconvenienced, but we haven't had an actual business issue. So I thought that's really relevant, to think about it from an MDR scope. And the only time that's relevant, though, is if someone's actually watching. An MDR tool is more than likely not going to be able to prevent malware or ransomware from spreading unless that somebody's watching it, recognizes it, and instantiates some kind of a containment methodology to prevent it from spreading or increasing that blast zone. So it's a very different way of looking at it. But you speak completely to the point, and I really appreciate that from the standpoint of, look, Arctic Wolf is doing the managed detection and response. Our tools are doing the managed risk vulnerability assessment and knowledge deliverable. ASMGi is taking all of that information and applying it to an active operational process for the customer, and the two together they make a complete picture, and that should be appealing to the customer base.
Yep. Awesome. So I wanted to just drill into that a little bit, and it just kind of reiterates what you said and what I said earlier. But Arctic Wolf is providing our MDR MSOC Plus program is powered by Arctic Wolf. There's no question that it's the base of the solution, and from that technology and operational base, then will complement both the operations and the technology. Basically, it's no different, and we look at the whole solution, quite honestly, as like implementing. We can call it like implementing a piece of technology, even though we know there were people involved and there are operations involved. But from the customer perspective, like, we'll be the operating model in most cases, right? So we'll leverage the wisdom and the smart people on your team, right? And the fact that they're watching the store 24/7, and we can work together with them. So we had this conversation earlier in the week that, like, our incident response, usually we walk into a situation pretty blind, right? We don't know exactly what happened. We don't know exactly why. We may or may not know the environment if it's a customer that we do other managed services for and those kind of things. So we have to learn all of that stuff right up front. And in this solution, we'll be able to leverage a lot of visibility into that information right out of the gate, right? So our incident response teams will be better prepared, I think, to basically do the things that we do. But again, I just wanted to kind of drill into the individual components a little bit. Do you have any thoughts or comments on any of that stuff?
Yeah, the point of having the backstory is super relevant. When we think about it in terms of incident response, there are various organizations out there that will do incident response just as you call them up, and then next thing you know, there's a dream team of folks that show up at your door, and they go in and they sit down and they start chewing through information to determine what the incident response requirement is. These folks aren't cheap. They're very expensive, and if you can imagine it simply from a cost standpoint, if there's a lot, to your point, if there's the backstory and the source information and the log data and the affected assets and or personnel, all of that stuff is ready for ASMGi's incident response team to rock and roll with. Not only is that customer going to be much more quickly back in business and doing the things they need to do, but they're also going to be doing it effectively, right? So if we transpose that against someone that doesn't have that background that Arctic Wolf would provide, they could be there days or weeks running up a very astronomical bill to accomplish the same task, and may not even be successful. So there's a lot that goes into incident response. It's not just about calling up Superman and his group of merry men to do incident response. It can be very, very long, drawn out, painful process. Whereas if a customer is an Arctic Wolf customer, they've invested in that managed detection and response, the managed risk component, and now ASMGi is their actual services deliverable from the operational side. They truly have stepped into win-win territory.
Yep, that's the idea, right? So let's drill into the program, or to the services in general, a little bit. And I just wanted to go through this from a program standpoint. So one of the things that we're really trying to do is work with the business to understand what's unique about their business and make sure that we create a program that is specific to them and meets the requirements that they outline. And then again, like I said, all the SLAs, I talk a lot about it's so important to align technology and operating models to strategic objectives, right, in a program. And one of the metaphors I use for that a lot of the times is vulnerability management. I've reviewed vulnerability management programs that articulate you can't have 4s or 5s or 8s or 10s, whatever scale you prefer to use from a CVE standpoint, right? You can't have a critical vulnerability that exists for more than 30 days, but they're only doing vulnerability scans once a quarter, right? And I'm like, there's no alignment, right? So you can say that that's your SLA all you want, but you can never achieve that if you're not doing scans in a timely fashion, right? So this is why it's so important to have all of those pieces work together to achieve the outcomes that you want. But I chuckle when I tell that story, but it's very true. And it's also it's a great example of why it's so important. So programs, a lot of times they sit in a notebook that's got some dust on it, right? And then the technology, somebody's spending money on new technology, but it doesn't. The programs just don't match. It doesn't align with anything. But compliance and risk is a huge area that, and again, I think Arctic Wolf is helping us really meet compliance requirements because you guys are doing a lot of the mapping. So just by virtue of doing some of the things that we're able to do together, we meet compliance requirements in multiple, frameworks or regulatory requirements kind of things, right? Multiple controls. But you do that mapping, right? So from an evidence standpoint, and again, collecting logs and SIMs and all that stuff, it's a part of every regulatory audit that we've participated in and we've helped customers navigate through as well. So we can pull all that stuff from the system. And then from the operation standpoint, it's about, so first you have to put a good plan in place, and then you have to, pick the right solution. And then you have to figure out how to actually do it, right? And you have to do it every single day. But so you have to execute against that plan and deliver those types of services. So I'm going to keep moving because we are running out of time here. But so I'll go real quickly through a couple of things. Who's the service for? Really, any company that doesn't have the resources internally, be it headcount or expertise, to accomplish these things, is a good candidate for this service. And it doesn't really matter if they're a big company or if they're a small company. The same challenges apply across the board. Big companies, typically, you think about having more mature security programs, but they may not have the headcount or the expertise to be able to do some specific things. So I wanted to call that out. I also wanted to talk about the Gartner maturity model. And one of the things that I just wanted to say is, Gartner, the whole Security Operations Center, Gartner said, hey, we have a maturity model around the Security Operations Center specifically, and you should be doing these things. And the reason I think this model is cool is because we are doing these things with your program. So we can take a company that doesn't, either have a good security posture or a lot of maturity in their security program, and we can take this piece of it and we can get to a very significant maturity level right out of the gate just by virtue of deploying these things. And that's really, so if you step through what Gartner says, and I love this piece too. It's not just about how many tools you put in place, right? You have to put the whole solution in place and be able to do these things. And as your solution evolves over time, and this is one of the things I think that collectively we're getting better at as a security industry, but certainly the Arctic Wolf tool as well. But doing the user behavior analytics, like saying, hey, weren't you in Florida last week? Why is there a connection from China or whatever? And maybe not last week, maybe yesterday or maybe earlier this afternoon is more appropriate. But that's in fact real time is a big part of it, and having 24/7 eyes on glass. But being able to say, hey, if you're physically here, it's absolutely impossible that somebody's logging in with your credentials from some other place. That's, again, it's just one example of user behavior analytics, but we can trap on those things, and then it's a good opportunity to get a hold of a customer and say, hey, there's a problem and you got to change your passwords, right, or something, whatever the case may be. So anyway, I want to talk through that, and then just from a summary key takeaway standpoint. I'm not going to read through all of these, Tim, but they all basically resonate a specific concept, and that is that we've got a lot on our plates as security practitioners and leadership in security. There's a lot going on. There's a shortage of talent, know-how, and knowledge, and those kind of things. It's not enough to say I have enough people to do a task. You really have to know what you're doing to be on the other end of an alert or those kind of things if you're going to do any of that stuff. So it's headcount and expertise and those kind of things. But everybody can read through these on their own. But I wanted to talk about some other key takeaways from today and things that really resonate for me, that a total solution is a program plus technology plus operations. If you miss any piece of that, then you're vulnerable. Leverage the information you have. So this is really about take advantage of things that you've already made an investment in, and log files is a great example here, Tim, and you spoke directly to that earlier. But leverage the information that you already have. Most companies have a ton of information, and they just don't have the processes to really grab it off. Focus on the foundational elements of security to improve right now. And I think if you do the blocking and tackling things, then the basics, right? You can improve a lot right now. You don't have to get caught up in the buy security frenzy, and it truly is a frenzy, and we've beat that one up pretty well. But security happens when you do the basics well. And the other point that I want to make, and I believe this from the bottom of my heart, and I get really excited when I talk about this program. But if you can only do one thing in security, do this, right? I think we cover the foundation really, really well with this program. And if I was talking to anybody at any enterprise anywhere in various different maturity levels, I would say the same thing. If you can only do one thing, do this program. So any parting words?
No, I think you summed it up very well. I think that is a great way to look at it. At the end of the day, the hardest thing to do to get started is to actually start. So I think doing that first kickoff and getting going, and leveraging some of the information we've gone over today will simplify that ongoing process.
Yep. I'm looking through the channel real quick. I see a couple of private questions. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I just want to I think some of these we answered with the content through the presentation, but we will send responses and answers to these questions out. But I did want to cover one question. We do patching. Is the program a good fit for us, right? So the answer inevitably is it depends, right? But there are a couple things that I got out of this question that I think are worth noting, right? It's really a two-part answer. One is that there's a big difference between patching and vulnerability management. And I think there's a common misconception in the industry, right? That we do patching, so we're good, right? We have a program. Patches, from my perspective, patches are an IT function, right? They've been a part of managed IT service offerings for a long time, and they're OS level, right? So Microsoft, every month they do Patch Tuesday. They come out with critical and security patches for the operating system level. So doing that is critically important. There's no question, but it is not vulnerability management. Vulnerability management, and I know this is part of the Arctic Wolf perspective on vulnerability scanning and management is look at all of the vulnerabilities, right? Third-party software that's on a desktop. There's Java virtual machine. There's an Adobe reader. There's all these things that possibly have vulnerabilities in them. A patch program won't find those, right? It's just not going to tell you if you have vulnerabilities there or not. This vulnerability program will tell you that. And just being able to operationalize remediation of those things is critically important. So,
including
including prioritizing, right? Because you can't do everything all at once. That's the thing. And some things, some vulnerabilities say you have to upgrade the software, right? It's not always that easy, right? It's not always that trivial. So you have to be able to prioritize, not just based on criticality alone, but exploitability, just risk in general, right? Here's some of the things I just wanted to kind of rattle off, and maybe you have a couple ideas, Tim, and then we'll wrap it up. Just some ideas about, is it a good fit for me as a company? So how do you know if it's a good fit for your company? I would say ask yourself some questions, right? Do you watch your assets 24/7? Do you have 24/7 eyes on glass, that kind of thing? If not, then this is probably a good fit, right? Do you have a vulnerability scanner and a program in place, right? Are you doing those things from a vulnerability standpoint? Do you have a SIM, right? I think that's a critical aspect of this, is being able to put an appliance on site and get the on-premise stuff, get the cloud, assets, but pull all the data together into one place so that you can analyze the data and keep an eye on the store. Do you monitor your risk or report on your risk? Do you have security resources on staff? It's that whole resource issue. Do you have enough headcount to accomplish these things? And again, I think in the presentation, in the slide I spoke to, if you have the resource, if you don't have the resource, it's probably a good fit, right? Whether you're a large company or a small company. Anything to add to that, Tim, in parting closing remarks?
No, I really don't think that there's anything to add. I would simply say, look, the security industry should be about all of us teaming together to increase the capabilities and the effectiveness of what we do. We're not talking about putting people out of a job. So, those security professionals that are already on board at these organizations, hey, we want to work with you, not against you.
Yep. Yep. Roger that. I think we're out of time. We're over already. I really appreciate everybody sticking around for some extra time. And I do want to share, if you have follow-up questions, please, please reach out and ask your questions. And we're happy to contact you for a demo or a deeper dive discussion or those kind of things at any time. So please do that. We will send the slides to everybody. So if you want a copy of the slides, and it's also worth noting that there's probably a few extra slides that we didn't accommodate in this presentation that I'll include that I think are relevant and meaningful, and we'll try to get the questions that we got answered in the slide deck as well. So thanks everybody for attending. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Tim. It's always a pleasure having you on, and it's a pleasure speaking with you always. So thank you very much, guys.
Take care.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.